Hi, and welcome to the channel. So today we're going to be discussing this Disney-inspired Beauty and the Beast piece, but maybe more appropriately, it's actually coming from a hashtag sixfanarts challenge that's kind of floating around on Instagram right now. So if you're familiar with it, you just kind of reach out to your followers and ask them to make some suggestions of 6 pieces of fan art you can do. And this particular suggestion came from somebody named Tiffany, who runs a channel, Tiffany's Fine Art. Now I'm going to put a link to her channel in the description, just so you have an opportunity to go check it out. She doesn't really dive a lot into digital work. It's mostly oil paints, and I believe she does some acrylic as well. I'm a big fan of her stuff. I'm a big fan of her channel. I just wish she would just put out more work, because she does some really just amazing pieces there. A lot of landscapes too. But go over there, check her out. She also does a lot of experimentation. She does a video where she paints with coffee, which was something I was really fascinated by. And again, I suggest check it out. Link in the description. All right, now, let me also get the boring stuff out of the way. If you haven't had a chance to do so yet, make sure you click on that subscribe button. It really helps me out, lets me know that I should be kind of continuing down the path I'm going down, and of course, if you have any comments or suggestions, you know where to leave them. So let's talk about this piece itself, Beauty and the Beast. Now, I will just come out right up front here and say, hey, I'm a 90s child. I think it's pretty obvious if you've kind of followed some of my videos before. So I am no stranger to Beauty and the Beast, and really no stranger to Disney either. If I speak to a little bit of my background here, I grew up as a teenager really kind of learning how to draw by copying pictures out of comic books, but at some point or another, you kind of come to this realization, at least if you're trying to kind of move forward with human anatomy, that comic books really don't cut it for very long. And it's not that they're bad. It's just that everything is this idealized sense of human being. The men, generally speaking, in comic books are just nothing but wall-to-wall muscle, and they're wearing tight spandex, so it's just, you know, you're basically just drawing bodybuilders all day long. And the women aren't really much better. They're overly sexualized, their breasts tend to be oversized and then not very realistic. In a lot of cases, you may see drawings of women where their spines bend in ways that no human being was ever meant to bend. So when I was kind of going through kind of my drawing evolution, as it were, and I was starting to kind of understand a little bit more about how to draw human anatomy, I certainly started with comic books, but eventually started taking a look at Disney for some examples of how to render more realistic humans. Now, I use the term realistic kind of loosely because we are talking about cartoons at the end of the day, and, you know, some fantastical creatures as well, like the Beast, for instance. But, you know, if you want to get a better idea of how to draw some more natural anatomy, you know, people that aren't 8 heads tall or you know, overly muscular, this is kind of a great way to go, taking a look at some of these Disney drawings and seeing how they've done it. I also learned a lot about how to draw clothing on the human figure from Disney, because again, in comic books, it's all skin-tight spandex and capes, so there's not a whole lot of room for like being able to understand how cloth drapes over the human figure, and Disney cartoons really kind of helped me out with that. Now, as I said, I'm a child of the 90s, but I do remember growing up in a time where Disney kind of went through something of an animation slump in the 80s. I won't really kind of mention any movies specifically, but if we move past that for just a second, if you kind of grew up during that era, you may remember that there was something of a Disney renaissance that happened in the 90s. And this is the period of time where they started doing just maybe some more high-quality cartoons that really kind of started capturing the imagination of another generation and getting more into that zeitgeist that Disney is, you know, usually pretty famous for. I'm citing movies here specifically like Beauty and the Beast, certainly, but also The Little Mermaid, and Aladdin. There's the big 3 that kind of come to mind. Now, I loved all 3 of those cartoons. Beauty and the Beast, I was really big fan of, and I won't lie to you here, while I'm drawing it, I had several of the songs from the soundtrack running through my head over and over and over again. Now, if we speak a little bit just to kind of the creation of the piece here, I will kind of let you know that as we go through the video, you're going to see a lot more time dedicated to the line drawing than perhaps to the coloring. And this really kind of speaks to the style that we're dealing with here. Since I have kind of some roots in comic book and cartoon type drawing, at least, you know, this is how I learned to draw, the Disney thing wasn't all that unusual to me, so it was pretty easy for me to go in and just kind of throw in a lot of these lines and get that Beast rendered and get, you know, Belle rendered and etc. I'm familiar with these characters, so kind of getting them down on the paper, so to speak, was relatively easy because I'm pretty familiar with what these characters look like. But despite that, I did get some reference drawings off the internet, obviously related to the Disney cartoon. But having said that, I did try at least a little bit to kind of do this a little bit in my style. So I used Disney still frames and pictures as reference, but I didn't specifically go out and try to kind of copy it exactly line for line. The eyes, for instance, on Belle might be a good example of that. The Disney eyes are very distinct. I'm not necessarily a fan of Disney eyes. I just don't like this idea that eyes are taller than they are wide in Disney cartoons, especially on the females. It works for the style of animation they're going for, but it's just not my style. So even though I'm drawing the eyes a little bit big because I'm trying to express emotion on Belle's face, I am still trying to kind of draw them a little less Disney-esque, if that makes sense. And I kind of try to do the same thing with the Beast as well. The Beast should look familiar. He's very reminiscent of the way Disney drew them, or rather the Disney artist drew him, but I took some liberties here and there with, maybe the way the horns looked or the nose and et cetera. So I tried to kind of honor what was already there in terms of the Disney version of this, but I also tried to kind of go a little bit with my own kind of technique here and there. That doesn't necessarily apply to the coloring, though. The coloring is really kind of animation cell kind of inspired. And since that really kind of matches up with my coloring method anyway, all I do is just kind of simplify what I usually do. So a lot of big, bold shadow and a lot of big, bold light that I usually do, but I don't really kind of spend the time to go into a lot of the subtleties of kind of the airbrush kind of softening and stuff like that. This is something I find really important when I'm trying to get a more realistic flesh on, say, a human face or something similar. But because I was going to go in for a cartoon look on this, I kind of backed off a lot of that rendering, although it was still necessary to get the shadow and the light in. Now, you may have seen it back in the beginning of the piece, but let's just kind of speak to it now. The light source in this particular picture is the rose. And this all kind of gets into this idea of what I had to decide to do when I knew that I was going to be doing a Beauty and the Beast piece. I kind of wanted to do something that was a little bit more illustrative. And what I mean by that is that, when you get this whole picture laid out here, it is telling at least a little bit of a narrative, a little bit of a story. Beast is catching Belle in front of the rose. He's obviously very protective of it. It's reminiscent of a scene in the movie, but this particular frame doesn't actually exist anywhere. So this is just another example where I've taken several different reference photos of various frames and stills from the movie and kind of drew them in the way that I wanted to kind of piece them together in a composition, and that's what we get in front of us here. Excuse me. So ultimately, again, I kind of composed the piece myself, but it was ultimately in that idea that I was trying to create a piece of narrative that came directly from the movie, or at least reminded you of a scene from the movie. The challenging part of this was trying to understand how to get this light source right. A couple of weird little things are going on here. So if the rose is the light source, that means that everything is in shadow that's away from that rose. And so usually when I kind of do a lot of pieces, the light source is something like the sky or a light source on a lamp or something like that. With this rose kind of coming from an odd direction, the light source wasn't really kind of where I'm used to it being. I'm used to kind of having light come down off the top of the head and cast a shadow from the nose over the lip. And in this case, everything is just kind of an exact opposite, at least as far as the Beast is concerned. All the lighting is coming up from underneath, all the shadows have to come from kind of top down. And it can be a little bit difficult to kind of wrap your head around if you're not used to kind of, putting shadows in that manner. To try to give myself some reminders here of where that light source is coming from, I did kind of render in a pink glow around the line work for the glass covering of that rose. I'm hiding the rose right now because I just don't want it in my way while I'm working on rendering Belle. But again, as something of a reminder, I just kind of put in a little kind of a quick pink glow in there. Now, the pink glow, as I mentioned before, is the light source, and that means that pink, or at least some sort of version of a warm light source, is going to be dominant throughout this. And that means I have to complement it with a shadow. Now, one of the great things about Procreate is there is a new feature. This is something that came around with a recent upgrade to Procreate 5. You have this ability to look for a harmony tool inside your color picker. So if you go into your little coloring tool and you go to choose whatever color you're looking for, there is kind of a selection down toward the bottom called harmony. And if you click on it, what it will do is it will actually show you different colors that will be kind of in harmony with each other. Now, that's an oversimplified explanation, but what I used it for in this specific case is I looked for the opposite or complementary color. So if I knew that pink was my light source, I wanted the opposite color for my shadow. And so when I went into the color picker and chose the harmony tool, this is what I got. I chose the pink, just as something that I kind of wanted to arbitrarily use as the light source. I chose my own shade of pink, but it was able to provide me with the opposite color, which is something of a light purplish. I'm not going to get into all this, lilac or periwinkle or anything like that. We're going to go just kind of pink and light purple and kind of call those opposites. So again, pink light source, light purple is going to be my shadow. And if you notice, I have the three blobs up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen for my palette. So the upper one is my light source, the middle one is my shadow source, and the third one down below there is a darker version of that shadow source, because I do have some extreme lighting going on here. So I am going to want some darker shadows. Now, generally speaking, with some of my more newer pieces, I've tried to kind of avoid getting things muddy and dark. So getting this secondary shadow in there is something I'm going to be using very sparingly in a lot of other pieces. But with this one, I'm really kind of trying to set a mood. I have one very specific light source. It's very kind of small and contained. The whole idea is to set a mood where, yeah, the beast is in the background, but Belle doesn't know that he's really there yet. He is going to kind of surprise her. We're catching that kind of moment before the realization the beast is there and startling her. So he's going to be somewhat in shadow. I didn't want to put him so much in shadow that you couldn't see him. I didn't really want a silhouette, but I did really kind of darken up a lot of the cape, or at least the parts of the cape that were hidden behind Belle and away from the light source, to really kind of help get that mood without hopefully going too dark so that it was unreadable as something of a completed piece. Now, you're not going to see those deep dark shadows come in really kind of until towards the end. And mostly the reason why is because I was trying to be very careful about it. So there it is, you kind of see kind of come into the end. And mostly what I did here is just take my shadow layer, duplicate it, and multiply it a couple of times just to kind of get the darkness that I wanted. So really kind of a simple take on this. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And I'll have 5 more of these coming out pretty soon. So stay tuned, and I hope to see you again. Take care.